I want to talk about Biden because what's happening to him politically and within his own White House on his Israel policy is interesting. You mentioned possible third parties. That won't be the only thing pulling votes away from Biden. This growing Palestinian constituency or supporters of Palestine is getting more and more vocal. And the White House is trying to find a way to deal with them, even though Biden seems pro-Israel. And he's been pretty good in his comments about Israel, not uniformly, but, net. So there's a deep dive in the Washington Post this week saying White House grapples with internal divisions on Israel-Gaza. Earlier this month, a group of about 20 distressed White House staffers requested a meeting with President Biden's top advisors, his White House chief of staff, his senior advisor, and his deputy national security advisor. And they sat with these whiners. They wanted to know the administration's strategy for curbing the number of civilian deaths, the message it plans to send on the conflict, and its post-war vision for the region. Now, there's no suggestion that these are people who are responsible for messaging or policy. It's just 20 distressed White House staffers who are demanding answers from the president and getting them. Some participants felt that these officials fell back on familiar talking points. They go on to say this story is based on interviews with 27 White House officials, senior administration officials, and outside advisors. Wow. And they say that, the division inside the White House is to some degree between Biden's senior longtime aides and an array of younger staffers of diverse backgrounds. These are the wokies who are in there saying, protect the people who look like me, irrespective of blame. Then Biden met with 5 prominent Muslim Americans the day after he said you should be skeptical of the death toll numbers coming out of the Gaza Health Ministry. And the next day he met with these 5 prominent Muslim Americans and apologized. According to the Washington Post, he said, "I'm sorry. I'm disappointed in myself. I will do better. No, sir, you had it right the first time. Should not trust numbers coming out of Hamas, the group that puts babies in ovens. They are not our friend when it comes to anything." And now, since Hamas has launched his attack, the administration officials have had regular discussions with staffers, political appointees, and outside groups to reassure them and to gauge their reaction. And we could go on. So the White House having to do still more hand-holding. We know it was Kamala Harris who put that line about Islamophobia in Biden's initial address on Israel. It was so out of place. It didn't make any sense. We were seeing an outbreak of anti-Semitism. That's where they went because of her. And this actually has serious political consequences potentially for this president in an election year. What do you guys make of what we're seeing there, the appeasement, and how this unfolds over the next 12 months?
I mean, talk about the least surprising news story. I mean, when you see unnamed congressional staffers signing a letter or petition of some sort about Israel and Gaza, when you see the ACLU being lost to a younger generation of people who don't want to stick up for civil liberties, of bad people anymore, and has been completely taken over by, a totally different agenda. I mean, Barry Weiss, my friend and a very close friend of the Fifth Column podcast, was like ridiculed at the New York Times for saying that there is a division, a fissure that is open between the younger staffers and the older staffers, and that was considered to be some sort of sacrilegious thing to say, and something that wasn't true. It clearly was true, and we've seen this over and over again. I mean, that kind of thing is unsurprising. The best way of handling that is to ignore it. They have what are they going to do? Going to go public? And, put the Biden administration is already having a very tough time with its poll numbers on this policy in even a worse position. I mean, I can't imagine they would. The best thing to do is to ignore people like this. The comments that Biden made to the 5 Muslim leaders about the death toll figures is very distressing. You have to stand up, and you would hope that these Muslim leaders would also themselves not trust and not want to be associated with Hamas and not think that they're honest brokers. I imagine one would hope that was the case. But I want to remind everybody of something that has really been forgotten about, because we do actually have a test case about these numbers. right? I mean, it's 10,000, 11,000, 12,000. The numbers are going to be high because it's war, and it's deeply, deeply unfortunate. And I cannot stand seeing those images myself. But let's remember the Israeli rocket attack on the hospital that turned out not to be an Israeli rocket attack on the hospital. Recall that the Gaza Health Ministry immediately said that 300 people died. And European intelligence 500. Said, well, I think they said 500. 500 went down to 300, trying to become a little more realistic. And 500 initially, and then people in various European intelligence said, well, it wasn't. It was a misfired Islamic Jihad rocket, and the numbers could be anywhere from 5 to 6 to maybe 30. So we have an example of them inflating. 20, 30, 50x. On one thing that turns out we find out isn't true. It's hard to find out that these things aren't true. It's very rarely are you provided an opportunity like that to see them lying in action. And they have very precise numbers very quickly. The Israelis took them about they're still counting the number of people who died on October 7th. They tell you 372, some exact number.
And they'll adjust. Died. They really will adjust downward on the Israeli side. Like they said 1,400
They already
killed,
have.
And then they came out and said it was actually 1,200.
Yeah, that's right. They understand that their reputation, their international reputation, is one that is savaged more than any other country. I mean, Bashar al-Assad doesn't get these things in front of the United Nations, condemning them as much as Israel does. They hold the record every year, so they know they have to be careful about this stuff. So saying that the Gaza Health Ministry is untrustworthy, not even saying that those numbers are totally wrong, saying that one has to be skeptical of this, in the fact that people are being, shown into the White House to tongue lash the president for saying something that is transparently true, is a bit troubling to me.
And dozens of your staffers giving comment on an article like this, making it clear that you are saying things publicly that you are then disparaging in private. I mean, this is not a good look for the Biden administration. It suggests that the entirety of this administration is kind of in disarray. And one can only expect things to get substantially worse for them where this conflict is concerned, but likely in other areas as well.
The reality is
just to add to that. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Matt.
Just that the median position that a kind of public service facing young Democratic person, especially if they're going to be focusing on international relations, their median position is going to be kind of the root of the problem in most of international relations, and certainly the Muslim world, is Israel's occupation of the West Bank and the failure of the resolution of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It's a huge generational strong belief. And then there's just an American-wide societal and very distressing belief that I'm sure you've talked about in this program, the Harvard-Harris poll that came out, that something close to 50% of 18 to 24-year-olds said that Hamas was at least somewhat justified in using violence on October 7th. That's insane. I don't want to believe that it's true, and so maybe it's a little bit lessened. But it is a political reality of the Democratic coalition. Absolutely, going forward, my question for them is: will they suddenly think that, well, therefore I must vote for Donald Trump or the Republican Party? Like, what do you think is going to be different here? But I'm not really sure they're thinking more than one or two steps ahead, or stay at home.
That's what they're saying. In this article, they say that one of the Palestinian Americans in one of the meetings with the White House aides said the participants left with more resolve than ever to organize their communities not to vote for Biden in the 2024 election. The person said Arabs and Muslims would also not vote for former President Trump. They could sit out the race. Go ahead, Matt.
Joe Biden has always been, I make one good metaphor a year, and one I made a few years back was that he's a rusty weather vane. Like wherever the Democratic winds are blowing, he's going to kind of get there creakily. And that's part of the reason why you vote for him if you're a conservative Democrat, is that he's not going to go full Elizabeth Warren on you and just completely lose his mind and start like making, monopolist investigations into Subway sandwiches. But he's going to get there slowly. If the Democratic base is absolutely split on this, and I think it is, he's going to have to try to address those concerns, and it's going to be unseen.
This is a thing that Democrats really have to worry about. Because They're worrying about it a little bit, but not very much, because the Republican Party is such a mess. And, these are the own goals that Republicans consistently give Democrats. You have young people, you have, Arab Americans, Muslim Americans, Palestinian Americans saying we'll stay at home, and some more radical young people that will stay at home. And, these are people that consistently vote for Democrats. A couple of weeks ago, I spoke to Rui Teixeira and John Judas. John Judas is a socialist. Rui Teixeira is a Democrat, and they wrote a book called The Emerging Democratic Majority. And they've just come out with a new book trying to figure out where that went wrong, called Where Did All the Democrats Go? And their answer is, the Democrats, if they want to win future elections, have to move away from radical cultural politics on transgender issues, on race issues, and all these things that, we talk about so much in the fifth column, and come back to normal, centrist, working class, bread and butter, kitchen table issues. Now, that is a problem. Those are the people that are on the quote unquote right of the Democratic Party, the sort of blue dogs, yellow dogs of yesteryear. And imagine that if these people are going away and saying, and Teixeira and Judas have a lot of poll numbers suggesting that's true. Now you're going to have people on the left of the party saying, we don't like what you're doing in vis-a-vis Israel and Palestine. So where is this? This party is going to fracture in 1,000 different places. And this is a great opportunity for Republicans to stop their silliness and actually get a party in the future that has a coherent ideology that is very different from the Democratic ideology, which sometimes I think has gotten a little too close to where they are, particularly on economics.
But where these foreign policy engagements are concerned, I think what you are ultimately going to see, and this seems to be almost necessarily true, is the merger of the cynicism, the skepticism, and the exhaustion of everyone else with respect to the entanglements in Ukraine and in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I just don't know that there is going to be, even amongst people who are very concerned about this, who generally stand with Israel, that they're going to be very excited about being engaged in these conflicts in a protracted way many, many months from now. It's already the case that we've seen a lot of that with respect to Ukraine. I have to imagine that will be happening on an accelerated clip with respect to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. So if that rusty weather vane is going to be moving, well, it should better move pretty quickly if it's going to have any chance of helping Joe Biden in this race.
Listen to how bad it is. They report, again, this is the same Washington Post report, that on October 7th, the date of the massacre, many in the White House responded viscerally to the brutal nature of the atrocities. The chief of staff emailed staffers expressing empathy with Jewish staffers and those with personal ties to Israel. Many Jewish staffers appreciated the note, but some Arab and Muslim officials felt it was tone deaf to their concerns. This is the day of the massacre, given that Israeli officials were vowing to carry out a scorched earth campaign in Gaza. So you've got Muslim and Arab officials inside the White House pissed off that a note of empathy went out from the chief of staff as the Jews were being beheaded, murdered, raped in Israel that day. Negative dings on credit reports happen to all sorts of people from all socioeconomic backgrounds. Understanding the credit landscape can be extremely difficult, very difficult, and unpleasant. Spending the time to dispute and repair these so-called dings can be a full-time job too. Good luck to you if you already have one of those or kids or anything else going on. For starters, you're going to have to deal with the three separate credit bureaus, and that in and of itself is a massive headache. It's also a common misconception that people with poor credit scores are just those who simply don't pay their bills. These can be very hardworking people who are negatively affected by divorce, identity theft, medical debt, student loans. I've been there. That happened to me. And don't have the time or are too overwhelmed to fix it. But if you do not address negative credit items, they can haunt you for years to come, and when it counts the most, like when you're trying to get a mortgage at a competitive rate. Well, the good news is that our sponsor, Lexington Law, wants to help you. Go to lexingtonlaw.com. Start today with a free consultation and review, and tell them Megyn sent you at lexingtonlaw.com. Hey, thanks so much for watching. If you like what you just saw, hit the subscribe button for more clips and full episodes.